Anne is going to do some introductions and get the meeting started, and then she will introduce you, okay?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, you sound great. Thank you.
Okay, you have your flag. All right, we're going to say, we always start with a Pledge of Allegiance. So we were told they had a flag in here, but we don't. But Bethany has a flag on her phone, so we're all going to say Pledge Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, welcome to our general membership meeting tonight. It's spring break week, so we assumed some people would be away. We're going to take care of a little bit of business right now, and I would like a motion to approve our agenda from one of our members.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Without objection, the agenda is approved. I'd like a motion to approve the January 2017 minutes. If you recall, our February meeting was our Lincoln Day dinner with Senator Sullivan. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve. Second.
Second. Without objection, the minutes are approved. I'd like to introduce our executive committee at Fairbanks Republican Women's Club. These are the ladies that make everything happen, the Lincoln Day dinner, Senator Stevens celebrations, the Senator Sullivan luncheon, and all the things we do to raise money and elect Republicans. That's what we do at Fairbanks Republican Women's Club, and we have given thousands of dollars to interior Republicans so they can be elected to municipal and state offices. So I'll introduce our first vice president is Althea St. Martin in the back. And Eileen Van Wy is our bylaws chair. Cheryl Markwood is our past president. Libby Dalton is our secretary. And, I'll introduce Julie. She's our past treasurer. She did a fantastic job for us as treasurer. So for the video conference tonight, Senator Dunleavy is going to discuss his budget plan and anything else he wants to discuss. And we've left some cards, index cards on the chairs, and we have some pens here. And if you would like to ask him a question, if you would write your question and just hold your card up, we'll come collect your card. And Bethany Markham, this is Bethany Markham. She is on Senator Dunleavy's staff in his Wasilla office. She will relay your question to Senator Dunleavy. So we're very pleased to have with us tonight Senator Mike Dunleavy. He's in Senate Seat E, which is the Matanuska Valley.
Yes, it's very broad. It's Copper River Valleys and Matanuska Valley. It goes all the way from Delta Junction down through Glen Allen to Valdez, includes the parts of Matsu, the Palmer and Wasilla, all the way around over up through Willow to Talkeetna. So
Senator Dunleavy started out his career as a school teacher, and then he was a school principal, a school superintendent, and then he was elected to the school board. That was his first public office. So I guess we could say he's probably an expert in public education. And then he was elected to the state senate in Senate Seat E. I understand that he has a farm and that he likes to... A ranch. And he likes to be with his horses and his mules. And I guess if we think about it, maybe he's with a few mules right now. So without further ado, Senator Dunleavy.
Well, thank you, folks. Thanks for, can you hear me? If you can hear me, wave. Can you folks hear me? That's a thumbs up? Okay, awesome. And then we have some constituents in Delta in the library as well. So I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I know folks are busy, but do appreciate it. So things are getting interesting down here in Juneau. I'm not sure if you've heard, but we're working through some budget issues. We're trying to get Alaska on a firm fiscal footing moving forward. And we're in some tough times, but I just want folks to know, and the message I want to leave, I think, is that when we get through this, which I think will be, a couple years, won't be very long, but maybe 2 or 3 years, I think once we get out of this, we've got a real bright future for Alaska. As you know, you've heard we've got some more oil finds in the North Slope that were discovered by smaller companies that are more nimble than the larger companies, although ConocoPhillips also had a large find as well. They call it the Willow find. But nonetheless, what we're doing is we're finding Alaska's a big state, and Alaska's got a lot to offer in terms of natural resources. And as you can see, as Prudhoe Bay and Kapar get tired, as I call it, there's other smaller pools of oil, though significant, that will be coming online over time. And if we continue to try to do our best to encourage this type of exploration and development, I think we're going to be in pretty good shape. But I want to talk about a couple things tonight. I want to talk about a fiscal approach that we had worked on this fall, and how that fiscal approach also dovetails with my Senate majority, which I'm part of. There's a number of different plans at play down here right now, and some of them have some of the very same components. And so I'm going to talk tonight about the approach that we put together. I want to thank Bethany. She put a lot of time into this. Our alleged finance put a lot of time into this plan, as well as the Permanent Fund Corporation. And so once again, we're going to talk about this, and then I'm more than happy to field questions here at the end. So we haven't done this before. I wish I was up there personally with you folks in Fairbanks and with the folks in Delta, and I'm certainly going to make time to get out there and talk to folks in my district and up in Fairbanks once this session winds down. But I'm going to go, Bethany, right now, and we start going through the slideshow and start. Okay, so here we go. So starting out, Alaska currently is in a recession. Right now we have the highest unemployment rate in the United States, at about 7.2%. You put that in contrast, let's say, with South Dakota, that's at 2.4%, or New Hampshire at 2.6%, Colorado at 3%. You see that we've got a bit of a problem on the employment side. We've shed thousands of jobs over the last 2.5 years because of the dramatic price drop in oil. The private economy has lost billions of dollars as a result of this. We believe that vetoing half of the PFD, which was $1,000, has made this situation worse, and we're backed up on this belief by economists at ICER, which is part of the University of Alaska Anchorage. You can't take this amount of money out of an economy already on its knees and not expect things to get a little worse. So vetoing the PFD actually sent people below the poverty level. And what does this really mean? Well, if you take enough money out of the economy, if you take enough money out of people's pockets, at a certain place where they're going to turn to the state or the federal government for assistance. And so although we may have vetoed the PFD thinking that we're saving ourselves some money, the fact of the matter is we're taking it from the people that would have spent it on the needs that they believe they needed, individual needs to take care of themselves. Now that $1,000 is gone, some of these folks are going to start turning to the state and the federal government for assistance. That's going to make things cost more at the state level. So what's the problem? There's three main things. The government continues to grow, and I need to make sure I'm as accurate as I possibly can be here. So we have reduced spending at the state level over the last couple of years, and we certainly have bent the curve, the spend curve down. But nonetheless, the footprint of government is still pretty large. And we're dealing with what we call legacy costs and legacy decisions made decades ago that had pointed the incline of spend upward. And so we've been wrestling with this for the past several years. We've made some inroads into this, and I believe we will continue to make inroads into this spending and keep pointing the spending down. There's been a drop in oil prices, as we all know. When I first came to office, oil was at about $113 a barrel. Last February, it was down to $26 a barrel. Nobody foresaw that drop. Nobody. And it's affected states and countries worldwide. Saudi Arabia is on the ropes. Venezuela is in chaos. And Russia isn't doing much better. We here in Alaska, though, we've been able to live off of our savings here the last several years as we struggle to get an approach in place, a plan in place, a roadmap on this. What's also happened to us is over time, we've had a decrease in oil production. We went from 2 million barrels in 1989 to about 500,000 barrels today. So what should be our goals? Well, certainly fiscal stability. Most other states have a population base large enough that they can have some predictable revenue and predictable fiscal stability. Now, 2007, 2008, when we had the housing market crash, and that was worldwide, the fiscal issue, states took a hit. But most of those states have recovered by now. And Alaska was in pretty good shape during that time, but we have a different economy, right? It's based upon oil, and oil was doing fine. Oil actually increased dramatically during that time, and things have turned around. So our goal should be fiscal stability. Future economic diversification. We're a large state. If you believe that global warming is occurring, there could be a good thing with that, and that is that the northern part of the state will become ice-free, and potentially we could be shipping gas, oil, minerals off of the North Slope by boat, ship, which can also bring more revenue to the state. There's a chance that we can get involved in the high-tech sector. We have a lot of secure space here in Alaska. It's cold. We have natural gas. This is all needed for example, server farms that we might be able to get up to Alaska. But also we can also get into being a financial sector. Abu Dhabi, Iceland, they got into the financial sector years ago to help diversify their economy, and there's nothing that prevents Alaska from doing that. But in order for us to get there, we're going to have to adequately size government, meaning we cannot have a government that just continually grows. You give government $10, they spend it, they grow. You give them $50, they spend it, we grow. Every time we get our hands on money, we're not really doing a very good job of maintaining the growth of government for basic services. We add new programs because we can. So we have to ask ourselves, what kind of a government do we have? Must we have a Cadillac government? Must we be all things to all people with all bells and whistles? A lot of us on the conservative side of things think not. What we want to do is have a Cadillac, a Dodge Neon-sized government that gets you where you need to go comfortably, doesn't break down, doesn't cost a lot. And we'll let the Cadillacs be bought by the private sector, and we in government should be having a smaller, less frill-like government going into the future. So what's not going to work? Well, counting on increases in oil prices and production is not really a good plan. We've done that for 40 years. We were very lucky. We've had downturns during that time. I mean, we had $9 barrel oil in the 80s, late 80s. Our production saved us at that time. The problem now is we don't have the production. We have lots of competition worldwide with fracking all over the lower 48 and oil production all over the world. So right now we have an oil glut, and chances are it'll stay this way for a while. So to rely on price and production is probably a bad idea. We shouldn't continue spending at current levels. There's no way we can sustain this. We don't have enough revenues, even projected revenues, to chase our current expenditures. And that is going to be one of the main things we need to work on this year and next year is reducing the size of government so we can get as close as possible living within our means. I'm not a real proponent of fiddling with oil and gas taxes. We were able to get some small producers and explorers up here, Kalis, Armstrong, Repsol, because we encouraged them to come up here with our change in our tax regime. Now, people would argue that we're giving our oil away. I'm not necessarily in that camp. I believe without incentives to come to a place far away at the top of the world that's somewhat hostile, cold, a cold climate, and with not a lot of infrastructure, your costs are going to be higher. If these fines produce, I think those that believe in changing the tax regime to encourage companies to come up here will be vindicated. And probably the worst possible thing we can do, folks, is rely on politicians to get us out of here. The system is really set up by the Founding Fathers for things not to work, meaning the Founding Fathers were afraid of a dictatorship and wanted to have checks and balances. The checks and balances work at slowing down a government taking your rights and property, but it's not foolproof. And as you've seen, because we used to get money out of the ground, oil, and not directly out of your pockets, it was a lot easier for politicians to spend it. And we have spent a lot of it. And so we have to continue to work at, again, getting this spend down and trying to save some of our money. But to rely on politicians to secure the future going forward, it's a mistake. We all remember the sticker that came out, bumper sticker that came out years ago. It says, "Please God, give us another oil boom." We promise not to, well, you know it, away this time. We have to come up with mechanisms, and you'll see here in a little while in this presentation how you, the people, are going to be able to help us get out of this predicament. So what's not a good idea? I don't believe changing the structure of the permanent fund without a vote of the people is a good idea. Now, this is the one item. This is the one item in which I differ with some of my colleagues here in the Senate. And you know, there's been some talk that there's a bit of a split within our caucus. It's not really a split within our caucus. It's just a disagreement over this one issue. I agree totally, and we'll go over this again, but I agree totally with my fellow senators in the majority. We need to reduce the budget. They agree to that. we need to come up with an appropriation limit, which we'll talk about here in a moment. I agree with that. They agree with it. We need to have a multi-year, multi-component look. We agree on just about everything except the permanent fund. And the reason is, I believe that people know best how to spend their money. And although we've got a fiscal revenue issue in the state, I don't think we need to transform the fund. Under the current statutes that have been in place for decades, we can take 50% of the earnings reserve for permanent fund dividends to go out to the people so they spend their money the way they want, and we can take 50% of that for government. And I just didn't think it needed to be changed. Some of my colleagues thought it did because they were concerned about raids on the permanent fund through the earnings reserve account. Anyway, in that respect, we differ. I don't think taxes are a good idea. We simply don't have a large enough population to tax to take care of a place that's the size, 2.5 the size of Texas. We just don't have that. And with a 7.2% unemployment rate and economies down south doing much better, we start taxing our people, there is going to be a reason for them to leave. And we've got to be very careful there. We shouldn't continue to increase spending. I hate to say this, but right now the governor has given us 2 supplemental budgets here in the past month where he wants to increase the size of government. It makes no sense to me. I don't agree with it. I've expressed this to his people. I'll be voting no on that. This is not the time to keep growing government, and it doesn't make much sense to me. The House, right now in their preliminary budget, they too are growing government. I'm not sure where they're thinking they're going to get the money, but if they think they're going to get it out of a private economy that has shed thousands of jobs, good paying jobs, that's in recession, I think it's folly. I think it makes no sense at all. And the other thing we have to be careful of is as we move into the future, if we do come into new revenue and more revenue, which I think we will over time, we have to be very careful that we don't create new programs, because what happens is, even if they might be great ideas, we've lost track of what our needs versus our wants are. Now everything has become a need. You grow constituent groups, and if the funding goes away, it's incredibly difficult to do away with that program because you have people dependent upon it. So what do we need? We need a comprehensive long-term fiscal fix that's multi-year, multi-component. I believe we need a public vote of the people if we're going to change the permanent fund, because it was the people that put that permanent fund in place to begin with. It was you people that voted on this in 1976. You were the ones that told politicians you're spending way too much. We've got to save some of this money for future generations. This may be the first generation in history, both in the at the national level and at the state level, that we may not leave a state and or a country in better shape than our parents left it for us. That's something we all need to give some thought about. The permanent fund was not meant to spend it now, here and now. It was meant to save oil money that we knew was finite, that was going to end someday, and turn it into a permanent fund, a permanent source of revenue for all Alaskans going forward. And I think we're in a tough time now, but I think the thing we can leave our children and grandchildren is a healthy permanent fund. We're not going to get through this, as much as I'd love to say this, we're not going to get through this with solely a Republican approach. We're certainly not going to get through this with a Democrat approach. The way the situation is down here, the way the process is set up, there's going to have to be some compromise. I'm going to be a bit of a stickler on reductions. I'm going to be a bit of a stickler on no taxes. I do believe we can use the earnings reserve. I don't believe we need to restructure the fund, and that's really the difference between myself and my colleagues in the Senate. So let's put it in perspective. These are actual numbers if you remove some zeros for our actual budget right now, but we dropped off some zeros so you can see it as a family income. So the 2018 budget, household income from, let's say, our jobs is $67,000, but you add zeros and you'll have the exact budget. Income. Expenses within our current lifestyle, in other words, what are we spending here in the state now? $94,000 if you use the analogy of a family expenditure. So our shortfall is about $27,000. We have about $144,000 in our trust, which is really about $14,400,000,000 at the state. Is this level of spending sustainable? Not with our revenues, it's not. And that's why we have to keep bending the curve down and reducing the size of government and the spend on government. So what would you do? Excuse me. We're going to talk briefly here about the permanent fund. So we all know what the purpose of the permanent fund is. It's our biggest savings account. We save oil for future generations. We talked about this. Permanent fund, it's important to understand because sometimes it's tricky to get your arms around it. There's actually two accounts associated with the permanent fund. There's what they call the corpus, which is Latin for body. This is the principle of the fund that is constitutionally protected. Nobody can touch that fund. It's hands off to everyone, and its intent is to save the money and grow the money. There's another fund attached to the corpus that's part of the permanent fund called the earnings reserve account. This account can be accessed by legislators, by government. It is not constitutionally protected. Problem that's recently occurred here is, unlike the decades-old relationship we've had with the people where we did not go into the earnings reserve, if we go into the earnings reserve too deeply, and right now there's about $8 billion in there, $9 billion. If we go in there too deeply and too aggressively, what happens is when you take a lot of money out of the earnings reserve, you're not inflation-proofing the body, the corpus. As a result, over time, inflation will erode that value of that body and corpus. And that's the concern for all of us right now. Even those folks, even my colleagues that voted to alter the permanent fund, they were concerned about that body, that corpus being eroded. And we have to keep an eye on that. I'm going to propose a constitutional amendment to constitutionalize the entire fund. I'm not going to rush this constitutional amendment. My goal is to get out to communities this summer and going into next fall so I can get as much feedback as possible on how that constitutionalization should look. But I do believe that with the governor's proposed budget in December, in which he wanted to move several $billion out of the earnings reserve, 2 weeks ago, the House of Representatives voted to move several $billion out of the earnings reserve into the general fund to spend. A lot of us became extremely concerned that the decades-old understanding agreements and statutes were no longer going to be able to protect this fund. And that's going to be a discussion I think we're all going to have here moving forward. And then, of course, is the permanent fund dividend, which came after the creation of the fund. The fund was created in 1976, and the PFD came in the early 80s. There were a number of reasons, and the PFD is the one thing I think that is causing a lot of discussion and disagreement. There's some of us that believe the permanent fund dividend is a dividend back to you, the people of Alaska, from mineral and royalties that go into the permanent fund because you cannot own the land you cannot own the mineral resources underneath your feet. I have 45 acres in Wasilla. I can harvest the timber, I can get gravel, but I cannot, if I had a large oil find on my property, I can't own that oil find. If I have gas, I can't own that gas. If I have gold, I can't own that gold because the Constitution of Alaska, as a result of the Statehood Act, the feds would not let us become a state unless we agreed that in our Constitution it would say that we own all of these resources in common. The reason they did that, made us put this in the Constitution through the Statehood Act, is because they believed our population was too small at the time to be able to have a tax base for such a large state. And so the only way we could become a state was to agree with this. So as a result, we have to pool those resources. And the only way you, as the people of Alaska, can get a bit of your resources in your pocket is through the PFD. Hammond also, Governor Hammond also wanted to use the people of Alaska as watchdogs, guard dogs to the permanent fund itself, feeling that if politicians went too close to that permanent fund, that you, the people, would get motivated to stop them from doing that. We're seeing a little bit of that now. But basically, they were the reasons for doing this, is give you some royalty rights for minerals that we all own, and for you folks to keep an eye on the permanent fund. So what's the solution? How do we get out of this? You can see that we've got savings accounts, and these are actual numbers from folks down here in Juneau in our Ledge Finance and also from the permanent fund. You can see that we have about $14,419 left in our savings. We have to be careful or it can go fast. Our approach to our solution, like I said, and we'll talk about this some more, is very similar to my Senate majority colleagues and our Senate majority caucus that we agreed upon, was to use some existing savings over a certain period of time, over a number of years, to help cushion the reductions as we go forward. We're going to reduce over several years, but we're also going to use some of our savings. We would also use, excuse me, the 50-50 approach that some of you may have heard of. And basically all the 50-50 approach is using the current calculations. 50% of the earnings declared that year that are in the earnings reserve would go to the PFD through that calculation. The remaining 50% could be used by government. It's my contention and the contention of others that there's plenty of money to go to government under this plan, and that there is plenty, there's the dividends that would be produced over the next 3 to 5 years are actually much greater than the $1,000 that you receive this year. Some of the dividends projected would be in the neighborhood of $2,500. We think that's important because, again, the private economy is in recession. Numbers of people have been laid off. They could use this money to help their own personal lives, pay bills, get through some of these difficult times in the next 3 years, but also help the private economy. And so the 50-50 approach is what we advocate. It's a little different than what our Senate majority is advocating. It helps private individuals, it helps the economy, and this approach helps government as well. You have to reduce spending, and this is the one thing that's probably going to be the most difficult for all of us to deal with. We build constituent groups when we build programs, and right now we're hearing public testimony down here in Juneau on the budget. And virtually every program, I'd say every program that we are looking at reducing in some form or another, we have folks from the public calling in and telling us not to do that. And it's understandable. A lot of folks are recipients of these services. Again, the problem with growing a government in this manner is once you grow government programs, you grow constituent groups, and it's easy to grow government. It's easy to create a program, but it's very, very, very difficult to reduce a program. Very difficult. And so reducing the spend of government by $1.1 billion over 4 years is what we advocate. It's steep. There is no doubt about it. It's not going to be easy. There is no doubt about it. But here's what people aren't thinking about. If you don't reduce this government by $1.1 billion over 4 years, going out past that 4 years, 5 years and out, the growth of government, without any additional programs, just because of negotiated contracts, other cost drivers, you're looking at an annual growth of somewhere in the neighborhood of $80 to $100 million a year. So in 10 years, without really adding any additional programs, this budget will be $1 billion bigger than it is today. We don't have the revenues to chase that. We've looked at graphs. We've graphed this out. We looked at the stats. We don't have the revenues in this state to chase that. So we would have to implement a tax that would have to bring in $1 billion a year. And that again doesn't stop the growth. And so we've done some math on this, and we see if we can reduce $300 million this year, it's substantial, it's significant, and it's compounding because you take $300 million off your spend every year after this. And when you calculate just the $300 million out over years, you're saving the state potentially billions of dollars. Now you compound that again the following year with a reduction of $300 million. You eventually with the 200 million, you get to a sustainable budget with no new taxes, not having to take any more of the dividend or the permanent fund. You have a sustainable budget going out, and not only do you have a sustainable budget going out, and we laid this out for 10 years just to really check it. Your savings accounts actually grow if we keep the budget flat. In other words, your constitutional budget reserve gets more money into it. The corpus of your permanent fund continues to grow. We get out by 2026, we get about $60 billion in that corpus. And some of these other accounts that we're looking at continue to grow. We do zero out the SBR, statutory budget reserve, under this approach, which is $288 million. And we do reduce the higher ed education fund a little bit under this approach. But in the end, long story short, going out year 4 and 5, you have a sustainable budget. That's why we are going to be pushing for and advocating for substantial reductions. If we don't get those reductions, if you don't see us hit targets, our target's $300 million a year, and that's the Senate majority as well. And I would say this, folks, if we can't hit 250, 200 at the most, I personally believe we're going to be looking at a tax here shortly. So we have to keep an eye on that number in terms of reductions. We've got to reduce, ideally 300 million and then 200. Now, some people ask, why don't you just cut the 1.1 billion in 1 year? The reality is, and in talking with some economists and others, if you do that, you could start a cascading scenario in our economy. That is a huge, huge cut for 1 year. And with our economy already in recession and with us already shedding thousands of jobs, it's just not a prudent idea to cut that much in 1 year. So by cutting $300 million a year, the idea is that we can shift folks from one program that's eliminated to another, give people a chance possibly to go to the private sector, or this is not something that we're advocating for or we're hoping for, but that some people may decide that there's greener pastures somewhere else. But there's going to be some tough decisions to get through this time period. I think the key to the future in the state of Alaska, I've been scratching my head for years and years and years because you're fighting this. It's like whack-a-mole. You push down, you hit the head, and 3 heads pop up. That's the budget. And so when looking at the Constitution, we have in our Constitution an appropriation limit. And this appropriation limit was put in by the people of Alaska in 1982 and then reaffirmed in 1986. An interesting thing happened between 76 and roughly 91. That was the people of Alaska were really concerned about how much money we were spending. Again, remember, we talked about the permanent fund coming into place in 1976. Then we had the PFD come into place in the early 80s. Well, in 82, the people of Alaska actually voted on an appropriation limit as a constitutional amendment that said they wanted spending capped and contained. So what happened? Why does this not seem to work? The problem was your politicians, as this appropriation limit, the language went through the legislature, some of the politicians did not want to limit spending. So by the time that product got out, in other words, by the time the language for the appropriation limit for the constitutional amendment got to the public, the baseline spend was too high. And the components within that were too generous. There are inflationary components, there are population growth components, other components they put in there. So the end result was, because of what was done to that appropriation limit concept by the politicians before it got to the people, we would have to be spending approximately $10 billion unrestricted general funds today. We're not even close to that. So, and that also tells you how much they were really spending back then. Their incline of spend back then was steep, very steep. And it's projected, for example, Terry Miller, who was lieutenant governor back in the 80s, he had predicted that at the rate of spend at that time, if we kept spending in that manner, we would have spent $45 billion. Our budget would be $45 billion in the year 2000 under that level of spend. So we have an appropriation limit on the books. We have a bill, SGR2, that we plan on, we have already introduced, where it's working its way through the system, that we hope to bring to you, the people of Alaska, for you to take a look at to try and get us to contain our spending. Under this appropriation limit revision, we would be looking at a baseline spend of roughly $5 billion and only grow at a percentage of inflation and a percentage of population growth over the years. What would that do? That would keep our operating costs small, but also it would signal to the rest of the world that Alaska is truly open for business. I was on a trip to Houston, Texas several months ago, back in October. Met with a number of folks that were investors in the oil company. There were some bond sellers from Wall Street. A whole host of folks were there. And I said, what is the chances of you investing in Alaska? And they said, virtually none. And I said, why? And they said, because you have a predatory tax regime. The moment we go up there, we set up rigs, or we set up concrete, or we set up steel. We know that you can't control your spending, so you're going to come after us. And I said, well, what happens if we had an appropriation limit, a true appropriation limit that limited the size of government? And almost unanimously, everyone said, if that were reality, if that were in fact going to happen, you have so many minerals, so many raw materials, so much oil, so much gas, so much gold. You have timber that we're really not cutting. These individuals said, you would probably catapult yourself, Alaska. I'm not going to say they're the top tier, but much higher than we currently are for possible investments. Well, what does that mean? That means private jobs. That means money. That means businesses, local Alaska businesses making money from these other outfits coming in. You grow the economy. But with an appropriation limit, the other thing that happens is you don't spend that money. Because if you're limited on how fast your government can grow, and let's say you're bringing in excess revenues, you can bank those revenues for future downturns, and you won't need any taxes in the future. So the key to the future for Alaska, in my opinion, is reducing the size of government, capping it, and containing it. And as I said, we would just have it grow at a percentage of inflation and population growth. If you ever get bored at night and you can't sleep and you don't want to read a book and you want to get on the internet, take a look at what they do in Colorado with their TABOR, T-A-B-O-R, it's a taxpayer rights, Bill of Rights. And they put that in the 1990s. It's 25 years old. They have been able to contain the size of Colorado's government because politicians can't institute taxes without the vote of the people. And so Colorado's unemployment right now is 3%. Their economy is one of the best in the nation. And many people point to that TABOR, as they call it, Taxpayer Bill of Rights, that has basically saved Colorado's economy. And then what we can do, like I said, with the revenues that come in, if we're not spending them, we can save them and we can grow our savings. But it's up to you. Politicians aren't going to be able to do it. When you see this bill working its way through, it's still in my committee. It should start moving here shortly. Talk to your legislators and tell them that you want an opportunity as the people of Alaska to tell us, the politicians, what size government you want going into the future. So again, solution. We have lots of savings. Use it judiciously over the next 4 years to give us a glide path, a glide down. Use 50%, 50-50 plan for the dividend was my proposal. Again, SB 26, which passed the Senate yesterday, is a different approach to the permanent fund. I voted against it. I don't know what's going to happen to that bill as we go through the House. It may get changes. It may come back. It may come back a better bill. Chances are it's probably going to come back, I think, probably a worse bill. And so we have two other bills, permanent fund bills, in the wings waiting. One is SB 21 by Senator Stedman, which is a 50-50% of market value, and one is SB 84, which is basically the 50-50 approach that I've been talking about. That's been in statute for decades. We need to reduce spending. You can use, if you don't reduce spending, folks, I hate to say it, but I think we're facing an income tax or a larger draw out of the permanent fund. We just have too large of a government and not enough revenue to cover it. And so the only way we're really going to get it down is we've got to reduce. And we've worked this scenario over and over and over again. And again, if we can reduce $300 million, or at the very, very, very least $250 million, it'll get us on track to bend this curve down, this growth of government down even further, and extend our savings and help us help prevent us having to put a tax in place. And then once we get that down, this is crucial. You got to cap it like a trap. You got to close the lid on this thing quickly. And the only people that can close the lid on this are you, people of Alaska. Unfortunately, the politicians and legislators are the ones that have to actually allow you to vote on this. But I'm going to be a real proponent of this because I don't think we should be taking money out of your pockets unless you have a say in this. And I just think it's wrong. And so this appropriation limit is going to be, I think, one of the key tools to hem us in as politicians and not have to go after you for taxes and be able to encourage investment from folks outside of Alaska, including some major industries. So again, if we do these things, and this is the approach that we have advocated, you're not going to need any new taxes to make this work. You won't need to restructure the permanent fund. And you won't need to cap the PFD. You'll still get the PFD as calculated through the decades-old calculations through this approach. And what this will also help us do is get back to separating our needs from our wants. Government, generally speaking, should be focused on public safety, roads, and schools. And quite honestly, we've got some issues with public safety. We have half as many state troopers today as we did in the 1980s, and our population is much larger. So we're going to have to rearrange what our priorities are. And some of the programs that we currently have are going to have to go away. And some of the money in some of those programs, I think, will have to be shifted to things that I think we all agree upon. Things like public safety, things like good roads, things like good schools. We do have a little petition on a website. It's called Savior PFD. If you go to it, saviorpfd.com. If you folks want to sign up on that, because I do have two bills still trying to work their way through the system. They are waiting for a hearing in finance. One is SB1, one is SB2. This would restore the $1,000 half of the permanent fund dividend that was vetoed by the governor in 2016. I was hoping this would move sooner because I wanted to get it out to the people, again, to help them with some of their bills, but also help the private economy. So Senate Bill 84 is the 50-50 plan. We didn't feel we needed to have a bill for this because it was already kind of in statute, but there was an insistence that we put it into a bill form so that there can be discussion on it, and so we've done that. Senate Bill 1 and 2, again, that's the restoring your PFD, and if you wanted to lend support to that, you can go to this website and sign up this petition, because we're going to be distributing. Right now, we actually have thousands of folks that have signed this petition, and we'll be distributing it to senators from their district so they can just get an idea what people are thinking on the restoration of the PFD. And then SGR 2, this allows the people to vote on a spending cap to reduce the size of government, the size and scope of government. We can reduce government. Let me put it this way: even if we reduce government by 1.1 billion over 4 or 5 years, it's just going to pop back up. Another legislature will come in. There'll be reasons to spend money. There's always a good program. People need this, et cetera, et cetera. You've heard it. You're going to have to hem us in. We tried this in 82 and 86, and I commend the people of Alaska back then. All we're going to be asking is that we revise this slightly to make it an effective appropriation limit. And so that's going to be key to this future. If we can hem our government in, we're not going to grow it to the extent we've grown it over the decades. And we'll be able to save the revenue that comes our way. So what can we do? Stay informed and engaged. Watch what's going on in Juneau. If you think we should be reducing our government, let your legislators know that. If you want to see SGR 2, the appropriation limit revision, move, let your legislators know that. The only thing I would ask is that, we do our best to stay respectful and focused on the issue. Sometimes these things can become very, very emotional, and I understand that because we're dealing with the future of Alaska. We're dealing with our money. We're dealing with potential taxes, the permanent fund. But what I have found over the years down here is folks, individuals, constituents that are able to articulate the issue. You get a lot more. Play. You get people talking about it in the halls. You get your fellow senators and House members saying, I talked with so and so today, and they were pretty spot on. They were able to really lay out the issue. Conversely speaking, with folks that are very upset and get too emotional, it's difficult for people to focus on having engaging in a conversation when people are pretty upset. But anyway, and in the end, understand that you're the ones that own this government. You're the ones that own this revenue. I was talking to a young man today in Subway, and he asked me a question. He said, Senator Dunleavy, I don't mind, or he actually said to me, he goes, I don't mind giving a portion of my PFD to the government. And we had a conversation, and I quickly deduced that he thought that government was the one that gave money to people. And I explained to him that it's really the people that own their resources. It's you that owns the money in your pocket. And again, as I mentioned early on, Alaska has an anomaly in its constitution. You can't own the mineral rights under your feet. So we've come up with a permanent fund dividend program to be able to get you a portion of what you own. That's your money. That's not government money. That's your money. Just like your taxes that come out of your pocket here shortly if we don't get this under control, that's your money. Resources, the state of Alaska cannot produce any resource in terms of revenue. We can't create money. We can't even print it like the federal government. And so it's your money. Understand that you've got the power. Unfortunately, we as legislators and politicians have proven that we do good spending, but we do very poorly saving and poorly maintaining the size of the government at a lower level. So we need you to hem us in, again, with SGR 2, so that we are not growing this government, so that we hand something to our kids that was better than what we got, that we continue that tradition of doing that. It's going to be you. And, of course, we have Abraham Lincoln over here on the right, who's got a statement. But if given the truth, they can be depended upon to meet any crisis. The great point is to bring them the real facts. So that's what we're trying to do. So thank you very much for caring about Alaska, and I'll be open for any questions. Can you folks hear us?
We're working on collecting the questions. Give us a second, okay?
Okay.
Senator, this is Delta. We're going to do a quick question right here. Is that okay?
Sure.
Senator Dunleavy, this isn't really a question. 2 parts, though.
We would ask that you would please make it a question, just because of time.
Oh, okay. How much opposition do you think you will get to SJR 2 as this goes through the Senate? Because it is a fabulous bill, and I think it's about time that somebody came up with a truthful solution like this that really does bring out a realistic way of keeping things going and still, just a truth. This is a good solution is what I'm saying, but I would like to know how much support you're going to get in the Senate. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So you asked how much opposition first and how much support. That's 2 sides of the same question, and it's interesting. I think we're going to get a lot of opposition, but I also think in the end, because of you, seriously, the people of Alaska, that will change. We're going to get a lot of opposition because there's going to be a lot of lobbyists and special interests that want to keep the spending going. These people are paid, and they're good people. They're not bad people. Don't get me wrong, but their job is to get more out of the state of Alaska. So in the beginning, we're going to have opposition to this, but if you insist that this comes to you for a vote, and quite frankly, if this comes to you for a vote and you vote yes, that means you want to hem us in. But I also believe there's a risk that people might vote no. I doubt it, but there's a risk. And if they voted no, then that means you want more spending and more taxes.
Okay, so question here from Fairbanks. Person gave some examples of the cost of their health insurance increasing and their property tax increasing and the PFD being cut in half. And so the question is, what is the incentive to stay in Alaska if all these taxes are enacted? And can the damage be undone with Senate Bill 84 that you proposed?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I came up to Alaska in 1983 right out of college as a young man. I always wanted to go to Alaska, and it has never disappointed me. It's one of the most spectacular states in the country, on the face of the earth. And I still believe that there's so much potential for this state. And I want to believe that what we're in right now is just a temporary trough. And I believe that we can pull ourselves out of this. It is an expensive state to live in, especially in Fairbanks, right? I mean, I know that the cost of energy is through the roof, cost of goods and services. Alaska, even on a good day, is very expensive to live in. I'm going to be honest with you. I think we're going to have a rough 2 or 3 years. I really do. But I think if we get folks that want to continue to keep the size of the government down, that engage you, that believe in you, the people, seriously, that want you engaged to tell us, do you want us to tax you? I'm also putting another bill together, and I neglected to mention this, that would be like Colorado, that would say the only way we can raise revenue through an income tax, sales tax, or property tax is if there is a vote of the people. Because if we're going to reach into your pocket and take your money, we should have you saying it's okay. We shouldn't just impose it upon you. And so I'm optimistic, and until I see otherwise, I'm going to continue to be optimistic. It's going to be a tough few years, but I think we're going to get through it. That's the best I can tell you.
Okay. My neighbor insists that Governor Hammond's intent was the PFD won't last forever. At some point, it would have to be used for government spending. Is that true?
There's a lot of debate on what Governor Hammond said. You know who I had in my office here on Thursday, which was just, to me, was a joy, was Dick Randolph from Fairbanks, who was a representative here in the 70s and the 80s. He was the first libertarian representative and East State legislator in the country. You guys know Randolph Insurance up there in Alaska. He was and I'm a historian. I could have spent weeks with Dick Randolph, and he was fantastic. Long story short, in answer to that question, the permanent fund was meant to last forever for future generations of Alaskans. The permanent fund was also meant to be used by Alaskans when there's a rainy day. But the permanent fund cannot solve this problem. It's too huge. It's too big. You're not going to solve this just through use of the permanent fund. The dividend, in my opinion, was always, and since it was put in place in the 1980s, even though it's statutory, I believe that the dividend serves a huge purpose, a good purpose that we should all support. It keeps people attuned to the permanent fund. Obviously, there's a lot of people that are not happy right now with what's going on, but it also allows people to spend it their way. The permanent fund dividend, I'm gonna wrap it up with this, is the most libertarian idea there is the most progressive idea there is, and is the most conservative idea there is. You rarely get anything like this, where you have three political philosophies that can support a concept. It's libertarian because you decide how you're going to spend your money. You're the one that knows what's best for you. That's a libertarian value. It's progressive or Democrat because they believe it's a basic income for some folks. In some parts of our state, when you have families of 7 or 8 people in the household, last year would have been close to $16,000 to pay for fuel, pay for oil, pay for medicine, pay for whatever you think you need to pay for. Progressives see that as a basic income. And conservatives, you should never, as a conservative, want the government to get its hands on a gigantic pot of money. I have never seen an instance where the government has gotten its hands on a gigantic pot of money and has saved it or have turned it into something good. It will be spent. There is no doubt about it. So as a conservative, you want that money locked tightly. And you want that. I still say you want that dividend. I don't think the dividend necessarily has to go away. I think what has to go away is our desire to keep spending down here in Juneau.
All right, there's a question about the 50-50 solution and whether or not there will be a sunset provision on that.
Oh, okay, good question. Yeah, good question. In SB 84, we do have a sunset in there 4 years, and the reason we do is this. Under the situation that existed for decades, if nobody was planning on touching the ERA, 50-50 would have worked fine, but the last 2 weeks have demonstrated to me some serious flaw, and that is the governor and the House of Representatives, at the very least, they have they're not afraid to go into the ERA and take out upwards of $8 billion in one shot. That will end up ruining the permanent fund itself. So that was a flaw in the decades-old law and calculation, but it worked because there was an understanding between the politicians and the people that we wouldn't mess with that. Well, that was broken when the governor vetoed the $1,000 last year of the dividend. And it's been further broken when he proposed taking almost $5 billion out of the ERA this year. And it was further broken when the House of Representatives said they were going to do the same thing. So basically, that door, the lock on that ERA door has been broken off. And there's going to be bags of money taken out of it. So in SB 84, we do have a sunset, but the reason we have a sunset is we're going to come to you with a constitutional amendment that constitutionalizes the entire fund and guarantees it forever with your help. If we don't do that, you run the risk of a raid on the earnings reserve account. That's the flaw that has to be changed. And so we're looking at the 50-50 plan for 4 years. That'll give both government and the people of Alaska plenty of money to operate off of. And then we hope to get a constitutional amendment passed by you folks to constitutionalize the fund in its entirety.
There's a couple different questions here asking, so if you could reduce the size of state government, what would you cut first? A couple different questions here about the actual reductions.
Yeah, I have a list. I have a list. So, the Senate majority is already talking about reducing education by 5% out of a $1.2 billion budget. We have talked about, let me just give you an idea. If you reduce government by $300 million, I'm looking at some notes here. That's an overall reduction of all of our funds in state government of 3.2%. Let me ask you a question. As a household, could you reduce your budget by 3.2%? Probably. So we're looking at, for example, we're looking at things like the ferry. We're looking at things like healthcare, health and social services with a number of optional programs that they have. We're looking at the budget for the legislature. I'm going to be proposing a steep cut in the budget for the legislature. We're in that budgetary process now, and I don't want to sound coy. I'm not, because we were working on this right before we started. But we're looking at the proposals that the House minority, the Republicans did in the House. We're looking at their amendments, and we're actually trying to combine them with our amendments. But there's a whole host of things. There's a thing called, for example, a funded unfilled position vacancy factor. And we're trying to get our hands on how much that is. And what that is the administration has funding for positions that they never fill. And so they use those funds to fund things like increases or salary overrides, et cetera, et cetera. We think there may be millions and millions of dollars there. And so we're trying to get a handle on that. As a matter of fact, I'll be back down here working on this on Sunday morning. I'm going to run home Saturday real quick, but Sunday morning. But we believe that through education, health and social services, things like the ferry, things like these unfunded, funded vacant positions, we're pretty confident we can get to $300 million with some of these reductions. They're not going to be easy. Remember, I keep saying this over and over again. It's not going to be easy to get us out of this, but nor should it be easy to take money out of your pocket.
I have a question here that's not related at all to what you talked about today, so I'm not sure what your familiarity is with it, but we'll see. I don't even know if you've heard this, if this bill has come to any committees that you are on yet, but the contracting community is very concerned about SB 34, the real ID. This bill has been held in your committee, so I guess it hasn't been heard yet. What is your intent regarding SB 34?
Now, we've heard the bill. I know exactly what the bill is. All we're trying to do with that bill, we're working with a number of different groups, is basically what the bill, what this bill does is the federal government is saying that we've got 2 years left to come up with a super ID where you can no longer use your regular driver's license to go on base, federal property like a base, or you won't be able to fly with it anymore. There's a number of alternative IDs that people can use in lieu of real ID, like a passport. So what real ID would do, and what we're trying to do here in Juneau with that bill, and we're going to be hearing it again next week, and we will be moving the bill, but what we want to do is separate out regular ID for people that don't want real ID so that you're not tracked by the federal government or your data is not lost or used in a manner it's not supposed to be. And then real ID, which really is a federal ID. And the federal government really should be doing this. They're making the states do this for reasons I don't understand why they won't do it themselves, but they want us to do it. We're trying to separate those two types of ID out so that the data is contained and there's no leakage of data, for example, in the state ID, the state driver's license. But we understand that there are contractors, there are businesses that want to see real ID go through because they want their workers and their people to be able to sign up for that so they can get pretty easy access to the bases, and we get that. But we're also trying to protect the rights of all of our citizens to make sure that the federal government isn't getting their hand on a information treasure trove that they could do whatever they want with. But we have heard that bill, and we're going to hear it again next week.
All right, and then I don't know if anybody has any other cards or not, but I've got one more here. Again, not related to the presentation at all, but asking if you are running for governor.
I keep hearing that. You know, sometimes I feel like I want to run for the hills, to be honest with you. But you know, right now I'm focused on getting this budget under control and trying to work through some of these bills. I feel if I've got to focus on that before I can look at anything else. But yeah, I've heard that. I've heard myself and about 50 other people are going to run for governor. You'll know when I'm running for governor when you see it in the paper. You actually see a press release. That it?
I think that's all the questions that we have here, and Jessica and I have been texting, and I think that's all the ones that Delta has as well. I just want to make sure. Yep, I haven't seen any more from her come in from Delta, so I think that's
Nope,
all.
that's
So do you want to make some closing remarks, Senator?
I just heard Delta try to cut in, Bethany.
I was just saying thank you, Bethany, and nope, we don't have any more from Delta.
Okay,
Awesome.
great. Thank you.
Awesome.
Senator?
Yeah, my closing remarks are, we're in difficult times, but we're going to get out of this. The era of big oil producing billions of dollars in which we really didn't have to worry about knowing how to budget. All we had to do was spend has come to a close. I think it's a good thing if we approach this the right way. I think it's a good thing if we reduce the size of government. I think it's a good thing if we cap the size of government. I think it's a good thing because we have to decide what kind of a future we want. We can't be all things to all people. We don't have the revenues to just continually grow with no constraints. We can't do that. You don't do that in your own household. You're constrained by your own income. You're constrained by your desire to save for the future, your pensions, your 401s, your 403bs, etc. I think we need to get government to start acting like a household, to be perfectly honest with you. If we don't do that, we're not going to leave an Alaska that we'll be proud of for our kids or their grandkids. I mean, briefly, just take a look at the United States, the national government, the federal government. 1913, I think it was, they said all we need is an income tax and everything will be taken care of with an income tax. We are $20 trillion in debt. That's going to be our future generations that will be paying this debt of $20 trillion. We don't want that in Alaska, I don't think. So I'm really bullish on Alaska. We'll get through this in 2 or 3 years. You're going to be asked to help by deciding how you want to hem us in, how to contain the size of government. I think if we work together and we do that, I'm really bullish on this state. I mean, I love this state like you do. So, folks, thanks for coming out and hearing what our approach is and how it's very similar to, like I said, the Senate majority approach. I am part of that caucus, and we all support cuts, the appropriation limit, all of the major components. We have a little difference of opinion on the permanent fund and how that should be used, but other than that, we're pretty much on the same page.
And we want to, for Senator Dunleavy, I wants to thank the Fairbanks Republican women for putting this event on and allowing us the opportunity to give people some information and stuff.
I think I see Julia in the first row or second or third row there, but I want to say hi to folks that I know up there and want to thank you for coming out.
We love you, Mike.
In Delta.
Thank you very much, Senator Dunleavy, for explaining your plan to us and answering our questions and giving up your evening time to us.
And thank you. And thanks to folks in Delta for coming out as well. And I look forward to getting up to Delta and speaking with folks as soon as this session is over. But we all differ in our approach to solving this. But I think as Alaskans, we all agree that we need to get through this, band together, and we're going to come up with a fiscal plan, I believe, this year that will get us through this. So thank you very much, everybody. You guys have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thanks.